Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Utah Story Show. On the show today, are you ready? We're going to have a giant earthquake in Utah. It's in the forecast. It's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And the question is, are you prepared? It's a very good question to ask because we live in a place that literally sits on a dried up lake bed. And the conditions that exist for a serious, massive earthquake that could be extremely devastating exist in our valley. So I have the man on the program who can answer all the questions. So I'm hoping we have some people chime in today. It's Joe Dougherty. Is that how I pronounce it right? Dougherty. Yeah. From the State of Utah Department of Public Safety, Division of Emergency Management, with otherwise known as Be Ready Utah. And he's going to answer a bunch of questions I have related to preparedness, prepping, how you get ready, what are the most forgotten things that people tend to neglect when there is a serious disaster. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about Curry Pizza. Curry Pizza has been serving Indian food for over 10 years. Guy Fieri from Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives recently learned about Curry Pizza and featured them on his show. Check out the episode, but more importantly, check out and try Curry Pizza. It's truly awesome. The Utah Stories program is also brought to you by Utah State, home of the Aggies. Living on campus means more sleep, more friends, and better grades. While others are driving or walking to campus, you're getting those precious extra minutes of sleep. Instead of going home to mom or your cat, you're hanging out with roommates, neighbors, and friends. On-campus housing is a community of academic support, peer mentors, friends, constant activities. For a virtual tour, room details, theme options, and to apply, visit usu.edu/housing. All right. So, Joe, what is the number one thing that people neglect and forget about when they're getting ready, when they think they're prepared, but perhaps they actually aren't?
So, well, the best part of your question is that we're talking about people who are actually trying to do preparedness. We are one of the greatest states for emergency preparedness. When I talk to my colleagues around the nation, they're a little bit jealous of how many people here seem to have a preparedness mindset.
We have a lot of preppers, for sure.
It's all ranges, too, because there's some people that would call themselves, diehard preppers. Other people that feel like, well, I'm not a prepper because there's a certain, feeling with the word prepper about someone who's expecting that cataclysmic, event that means they're going to have to leave the state, leave the area for an extended period of time. Mm-hmm. And there are people who think, well, I just want to prepare so that I am going to be comfortable in my own home for an extended period of time.
A highly extensive home canner,
right?
For example.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are a number of great things that people do, and we always talk about the key things that you should have: food and water. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that are going to help you survive the best. But sometimes we find that people forget a very simple tool, and that's called a can opener. Because if you have all that canned food, you are going to want to know how to open it. And so make sure that you can actually get to that food. So that's the first thing when I say, make sure you have a can opener. People go, oh yeah, I didn't even think of that.
And not an electric one, because we might not have electricity.
Exactly. Yeah. So a manual can opener. So that's one thing that people often forget. The second thing is a little more costly that people tend to forget, and that is having adequate insurance. Insurance is really going to be your best bet for disaster recovery. Some people think that, hey, FEMA's just going to show up and is going to help us out. On average, the payout for people in a disaster is somewhere around $2,300 to $2,500.
In a major disaster?
From the federal government, that is the average payout.
Wow. What about from insurance companies, homeowners?
So if you have your home is covered, you will have a deductible that you have to take care of, obviously your annual premium as well. But if you have a whole home coverage, then you can expect that your home will be restored. And so that could amount to the hundreds of thousands of dollars that's available to you if you have proper insurance.
But if I understand correctly, most insurance policies don't cover earthquakes in Utah. Is that right?
Bingo.
Yeah.
They don't. So you have to do the research and make sure that you have proper earthquake insurance, which is an extra rider on top of your homeowner's policy. And you can find very affordable policies if you shop around. Usually the first quote that people get, the price sounds so high that they think there's no way I'm ever going to do that. But if you shop around, you can find one. My family has a policy that costs us about $340 for a $300,000 whole home replacement.
Huh? That's a year?
That's for 1 year. Yeah. And so that basically doubles my homeowner's insurance by 300 and whatever plus 340. But for us, it's peace of mind. And that's because I grew up in earthquake country. And I knew that having an earthquake and having earthquake insurance, you're going to want that for your own disaster recovery.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California.
Where you've actually felt them.
In 1994, we went through the Northridge earthquake, and our home was damaged to the tune of $40,000. And I don't know how many people have that much cash lying around to just do all of the foundational repairs, replace doors and windows, rebuild cinder block walls, all those kinds of things that insurance covered for my parents.
Yeah,
and so I've been
great.
a believer for a really long time because I have that personal experience.
Yeah. Man, that earthquake was crazy. I remember, wasn't it the Dodgers were in the World Series?
So you're thinking of the 1989 Loma Prieta quake.
Okay.
It was Angels and the Athletics, I believe, were in that World Series,
yeah,
and
the Angels.
centered around San Francisco. And that was a devastating earthquake. It had lots of fatalities, interrupted the World Series, so it was on the world stage. The Northridge quake happened about 5 years later. It was on the Martin Luther King holiday. So we were not in school, fortunately, because my school was damaged significantly to where we were out of school for an entire week. Nice. The high school that I wasn't attending at the time, they were out of school for the rest of the year. And they had to attend the rival high school for the remainder of the school year. And these are the kinds of stories that we hope that Utahns will pay attention to and realize, ooh, have we actually planned for this? Are we prepared to move an entire high school to another high school to finish out the school year? Are we ready for that?
Well, the difficult part is, I think, if you are about my age, in your 40s, I felt maybe one earthquake, but I had to be told we're having an earthquake before I could feel it. And it's just like we don't realize that it is actually a threat. So what is the reason we've just never had one, even though you could say our conditions are as bad or worse than what you have in Southern California?
Sure. So the earthquake threat in California is a lot different because you have the San Andreas Fault. It's a major fault. You also have the plates that are meeting each other right there off the coast of California, Oregon and Washington. So you have subduction zones that can generate very large earthquakes and much larger earthquakes than what we would have here. But the Wasatch Fault that we could basically look at out the window right now runs from Malad, Idaho down to Fayette, which is in Sanpete County. And that fault has the capability of producing a magnitude 7.0 earthquake that would result in devastation in whatever area it happens. Our worst case scenario would be something that happens probably centered in Salt Lake City. If it happened in the middle of winter, because that adds another level of complexity and destruction. If the power goes out, people get cold very, very fast, and that will lead to, unfortunately, more fatalities. We expect that from an earthquake that size, based on earthquake modeling, we would potentially see about 2,300 fatalities immediately, and then more would come as people succumb to injuries and diseases because there's no running water. And it's a really devastating scenario. And that's why we have this preparedness message, because the more people take steps, the better they will be able to recover. Now, I mentioned that number, 2,300. Mm-hmm. That sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, and it would be horrible for the people who are affected by that. But if you think about the inverse of that, 99% of people are going to survive. Mm-hmm. So what kind of quality of life do you want to have in the aftermath?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the question for every Utah.
Do you want a house, or you don't? Are you okay living on the street?
Right.
Or in an empty lot?
Are you ready to be a helper, or are you going to be someone is planning to depend on help that may or may not be there?
Mm-hmm. And what is it about our Utah culture that makes people so into prepping? I see that it is huge here. And do you think it's just built into the LDS doctrine, or what is it?
I think that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has had a lot to do with it. By having a typical majority population that are members of the faith, and where they have heard messages about provident living and disaster preparedness, putting money away, storing food for a year, where that has been part of the culture for decades. People have grown up with that, and people they revere as faith leaders are telling them to do that. It's very easy to obey and say, yeah, I think that's something that's important to me. But we have a few other things going for us. We live in the West. We are people who love the outdoors. We have people that are prepared to go recreate there. They spend extended period of time in the mountains. And so we do have this kind of culture that is built into the way we recreate, where people have trailers and tents, and they buy their freeze-dried food supplies. And so it's kind of awesome that we have all of these things built in to really build that preparedness culture.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of these things where I've known preppers over the years. Some of them have worked here, and I had a buddy, and he was so into ammo. Like he believed that if we have, I think he was more into the whole idea that we're going to have hyperinflation, and that our money will lose all its value. So what can I buy and what can I put my money into that's going to retain value? And so he put it into ammo. And he had like stockpiles of ammo, floor to ceiling in his basement, and that was like his most valuable asset. But I was just like asking him, okay, so how much food storage do you have? How much water do you have? So how much of those things do people realistically need to stockpile away?
So it really depends on how bad the earthquake, we'll use earthquake right now, how bad that's going to be. We expect that we would lose, in a 7.0 earthquake, we would lose drinking water, that there would be about 400,000 households without drinking water for months.
Jeez.
Think of where the infrastructure is. It's all in the ground. And it doesn't take much movement in the ground to break those pipes that we rely on. They would break water pipes, sewer pipes would be disrupted as well. And so we would have, it's just one of those, it's the part of the infrastructure that is the least resilient just because it's buried in the ground. And it wouldn't be practical to have it above ground. We couldn't have water pipes everywhere we go. And so finding the sources of breaks, repairing those just takes a monumental effort. So that's why water is one of those most important things. But we realize that people have their constraints. They have their living space that may or may not accommodate storing a lot of water. So at the very least, we recommend that people have 2 weeks worth of water per person per day in your house. And so for, a one person, they just need to have, what is that? 14 gallons, right? One person would need 14 gallons.
Okay.
And so you start to do the math from there. And
can you rely on the water that's in your hot water heater?
You can. Your water heater is a great source of drinking water, but only if it's still standing in an earthquake.
Yeah.
And so that's another one of our basic tips is go down and make sure your water heater is strapped. And you can buy from any home improvement store, you can go buy a kit that will help you strap that. It's about a 20-minute project. It's like this metal tape, and you screw it into the studs of the walls, and then you have that extra level of security. So not only would you have drinking water from that, but your water heater will not fall over, breaking the gas line and causing a fire, which also happens and has been documented in various earthquakes.
So if we look back to the 2 earthquakes you pointed out in California, what was the death toll for each of those? Do you know what those
I know that the death toll for the Northridge quake was around 59 people. And you think of how many people were affected by that earthquake. I mean, it happened in the Los Angeles area. Northridge is just in Los Angeles County. My home was about 13 miles away from there. We felt it with damage. And so it damaged to our house. So, but with millions of people feeling that earthquake and only ending up with 59 fatalities is a testament to a lot of things that California has been doing over decades and really over the last century. After the earthquake in San Francisco that really destroyed a lot of San Francisco and then led to a major fire that continued destroying San Francisco in 1906, California started looking at its building codes. How can we make buildings safer? And around the 1920s and 30s, California outlawed a certain type of construction called unreinforced masonry. And that's a fancy word for brick and block that has no rebar in it. And it's just that type of construction does not do well in an earthquake. Utah didn't start outlawing that type of construction until the 1970s or 80s. So we, from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, we had numerous homes built that are literally just made of brick and mortar. And this is not like a brick facade on the outside of a wood frame home, but we have 147,000 of these types of buildings just right here along the Wasatch Front now.
So that's why it would be so much worse here than it was in California.
Absolutely. Those we expect if the earthquake happens at night, there would be more fatalities at night than there would be during the day when more people are out of the home.
So if listeners are considering their own home and it is a brick facade home but with a wooden frame, are you pretty safe with a 7.0 earthquake, or do you need to be worried about
So we always need to be concerned, and we need to make sure that we know how to respond properly in an earthquake. But those homes are more, the word is survivable. And what that means is the home will last longer through intense shaking than what a 100% brick home would do. Brick and mortar, they just kind of fall apart. Wood is more flexible and tends to stay standing. Does it mean that we won't see any wood frame homes collapse? No, we probably would still see that because the shaking would be really intense. But your chances are much better. And there are a lot of factors that go into how well will your home survive that quake, the depth of the earthquake, its magnitude, how fast the ground actually moves in that bump when that wave starts traveling through the earth. That's one part of it. And then the type of construction you live in and how far away you are.
Yeah. There's a term I learned when I was in 4th grade, and I had a teacher who was way into earthquakes. He was a pretty cool guy. He just pointed out where the fault line is and that you can actually see it. Mm-hmm. It's, between here, right above Highland Drive. You can actually see where you have this big elevation incline. But he used this word liquefaction. And it's a term that describes conditions when you are going to have way more severe wave activity due to the layers that exist underneath our roads. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so in your open, you mentioned this ancient lake bed that a lot of us have built our homes on. Anyone who lives really below the Bonneville shoreline, that shoreline is the shoreline of an ancient lake. And so the ancient lake bed does not do terribly well in an earthquake. And what happens is there's a lot of movement and the soil acts like a liquid. It doesn't mean it becomes quicksand and starts swallowing up things, but the soil loses its ability to support a structure. And you can go Google pictures from the Christchurch, New Zealand earthquake, and they had the exact same problem there during their quake that we expect we will have. And you just start to see buildings, skyscrapers that are just starting to lean now. Sometimes they're 6 or 8 feet leaning out of being perfectly plumb. And that's because the soil is not supporting those structures anymore, and they start to lean. And liquefaction can lead to all sorts of other problems too, besides the ability to support structures, and they start to sink a little bit. It can lead to it can start to push groundwater up out of the earth, so where you start to get local flooding, and that flooding can happen anywhere. It's just wherever that water finds its least path, or the path of least resistance. And then it can also bring up sediment from underground as well. And so you end up with these things called sand boils, or they call them sand volcanoes. And wow. it's just water and sediment come up, and they can act like a very quick setting concrete almost, and you can keep cars become prisoners to this type of stuff. So yeah, liquefaction is pretty terrible, and there are a lot of buildings in a very high liquefaction zone. The state department or division of it's Utah Geological Survey. They have great liquefaction maps on their website. You can go to geology.utah.gov and you can see all of the science that is being produced on the natural hazards we have, especially the geologic hazards. And now, one other thing we did talk about earlier is you mentioned, we haven't had that devastating earthquake, but we have 700 to 800 earthquakes every year in Utah. And most of the time people don't feel them because they're very small magnitude 1s and 2s, but we end up with a handful of magnitude 3s that people feel. They rarely cause damage, but people need to realize that it is just part of living in Utah. We are earthquake country too.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that building a prison and building our inland port right on the shore of the Great Salt Lake is a great condition for maintaining integrity of foundations. Is there a greater concern when you build that close to the lake, or is that something that's accounted for?
Building near a lake does present its challenges. There is the liquefaction potential, although there's a lot that can be solved with engineering. You can engineer a whole lot of things to make things a lot safer so that you're mitigating the effects of that. The Salt Lake City International Airport is right out there as well. And that is one of those things that we hope we will be able to use to fly in relief supplies. But we just won't know until that runway or all the runways can be inspected. And so those are some of our first priorities in disaster response is how can we get the lights on? How can we get the roads open? And how can we make sure supplies are getting here? Is the airport going to be a functional resource for us?
Well, when they started that expansion, I noticed the first things they were doing was digging giant piers down to anchor all those new structures really well, which makes sense because you're dealing with the worst part of liquefaction, aren't you, at the lowest point near the lake there?
Yeah.
And so they were doing that, and then when they announced they're going to build inland port and prison out there, I would think the construction costs would be enormous because you got to build everything on piers, basically, right?
I would expect so, and I'm not an engineer.
Yeah,
I'd say, that sounds great to me. So, but no, we'd definitely put that question to an engineer about how you mitigate for a high liquefaction zone, how you for even groundwater that's there, and then the other things that lakes do too is there's something called a seiche, which is when the earth is moving and it starts that sloshing like a bathtub. That can happen as well when you have water nearby. Now, I know that this is not like literally on the Great Salt Lake, but there are areas that could be a concern as well about that sloshing kind of function from earthquake shaking.
Cool. All right, we'll take a little break, and when we get back, we'll talk about what the 5 most important things any Salt Lake City resident can do to be prepared for the big one. And I want to tell you about Legends. Legends Pub and Grill is locally owned and serves fresh, wholesome, delicious ingredients. Legends features steaks, burgers, sandwiches, salads, pizzas, and calzones. Plus, they offer gluten-free and vegetarian options. Legends also features 30-plus craft beers, and local brews. That's why I love them. I love craft beer, which we'll talk about a little bit later today. Legends accommodates all ages. Legends now has 2 locations to serve you, downtown Salt Lake City at 677 South, 200 West, and at Southtown, their new location, 10631 South Holiday Park Drive in Sandy. All right, so 5 easy things, or I guess I should say the most important things residents of Utah can do to prepare for an earthquake.
Yeah, so it starts with those main things we talked about, food and water. That is going to be your essential. That will allow you to survive the longest or wherever you are, and will allow you to help out your neighbors who may not have prepared as much. And that was one thing that I think people overlook with preparedness is, hey, I should be ready to help my neighbors out. Yeah. And one thing that we've seen from disaster researchers is that neighborhoods that have a strong sense of community tend to recover better than other areas, even areas that are more affluent or more educated. You have that sense of belonging to your neighborhood, and so make that a real thing. That would be the call that I would issue to every Utahn is just go meet your neighbors. Find out who they are. Find out how you can work together as a neighborhood when disaster strikes. So food, water, and community. Those are our first 3 things. Besides that, what other unique needs do you have as a Utahn? Do you require any medication? There are something like 48% of people are on some sort of prescription medication. So do you have access to that? Do you have the ability to save some up? That's something people should communicate with their doctor and figure that out. I have a brother-in-law, two brothers-in-law who require insulin. And that has its own special challenges because it has to be refrigerated. And so are you ready to do that as well? And then to figure out what other special, unique, or access and functional needs people around you have. Is there someone who is in an electric wheelchair? Somebody who requires a walker? They have low mobility. Those are the other things that we need to work on identifying in our neighborhoods and in our communities.
Cool. And so do you recommend people have their own disaster plan or just basic preparedness?
Right now, that because it's the most attainable thing, is everybody needs to have their own disaster plan. We do need to rally around each other. A lot of times in the emergency management community, we think we're planning for others. Oh, we're planning to take care of this group or that group. But we need to move away from that to planning with each other. And so we need to start being more inclusive with the way that we plan. And we would encourage people, if you are a caregiver or you know someone or you are someone with an access and functional need, go meet your local responders, go meet your emergency manager, and let them know, hey, I'm going to have these issues, and I'm going to need help in a disaster. So we can start planning for how that response will look. All disasters, that disaster response happens at the local level. Police, fire, EMS, they're going to do heroic things. And they have that first responsibility to take care of their communities. But a lot of times we forget that we have an individual responsibility as well.
Yeah, when you call 911 and maybe 50,000 other people are calling 911, the chances are you're probably not going to get what you need. So your plan probably shouldn't be just like get in my car and drive away, right?
Right. And if you're in a high liquefaction zone or there's damage or debris on the roads, you may not be able to drive away. So the first thing is we do need to plan to be self-sufficient for an extended period of time. And because 2 weeks is an attainable amount where people, can buy a little extra food each time they go to the store, buy some extra water, it doesn't take long to build up a 2-week supply. But we would encourage people to continue building that to be
it's like
in the months.
Rice and beans. I bought a big, I think I have 3 5-gallon buckets of rice and beans. I mean, and that would last us, I think, my wife and I, probably 3 months. Our dogs, on the other hand, that would be another issue.
Yeah, you can't feed them rice and beans.
No, they wouldn't be able to eat that. So what do you recommend people with pets do?
Yeah, so pet preparedness is another huge part of planning for our disasters. And remember that a pet is a member of your family. That's generally why people have these great companions, because they are special. And so your pets need their extra food, extra water. Do you have extra, kitty litter and those kinds of things? We don't want people to just set their pets loose in a disaster and say, hey, run free, Fido. It doesn't work like that. And so do we have a way to transport our animals? Do we have, kennels, or do you have a place that could become a boarding location for your animal in the event of a disaster? And if you do have that, what is their backup plan? If you are away on vacation and a disaster happens, do you still know what that plan is for your pet? And so it's just one of those things that we need to, it's an uncomfortable thought. People don't like going mentally down that road of, okay, it's going to be this bad. Now what? Because it's very easy to feel overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
And so we just say, take one thing and do that one thing. Just focus on your pet for today. Go buy an extra bag of dog food. And at least you have that. And then you have a little more confidence. And with every little thing you do, you build that confidence over time. And think about how good you're going to feel when you say, I think we're going to be able to handle a couple weeks on our own. It's a great feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I like that Spirits Alive in Utah, and that's a big part of what we cover in Utah Stories is self-reliance. We have a gardening section all throughout the summer because I strongly believe in growing a backyard garden. I think that everybody should be more self-reliant. I think that's one of the sort of Latter-day Saint objectives is to create a greater level of self-reliance, and that was part of the original pioneers' dream when they came out here. And so I encourage everybody to check out what's the website that you have?
Great. There are a lot of great websites out there. From our division, we have the Be Ready Utah program that was started in 2006. And Be Ready Utah means be ready for everything. And we have information about all sorts of disasters besides earthquakes, floods and fires and extended power outages. Go to bereadyutah.gov. And then every year we also hold the Great Utah Shakeout, which is a chance for people to go practice their emergency preparedness actions. Cool. In an earthquake, this would be a great table. We would drop to the ground, take cover under this table, and hold on to it until the shaking stopped, because this will protect us from these ceiling tiles and lights and things. We've got a lot of equipment in here that could fall over. People are more likely to be injured by this type of stuff than the actual building coming down. So that's why we want people to practice drop, cover, hold on. And you can join 1 million Utahns who participate in this drill every year. 1 million people. That's a third of our state. That's another thing that really causes some jealousy around the nation is we have the highest per capita participation in this drill. We've been doing it since 2012. And so by this point, we have had about 7 million people participate over the 8 years that we've done this drill so far. And we're just ecstatic that Utahns are paying attention and they know that there's something they can do. So at the very least, April 16th, 2020, mark your calendars, plan to participate with us. And then once people do that very basic drill, then we ask them to, come out from the place they would take cover and then go look around their space. What things might have fallen on you? Is there furniture that you could secure so that it won't topple over? Are there heavy pots that should be on lower shelves, or that bowling trophy that you really don't want falling on your head in your bed? So there are a lot of things that people can do. You can register at shakeout.org/Utah. And right now, I just checked, we already have 55,000 people that are registered for next year, this April 16th drill. And the drill just happens wherever you are. So we make it a kind of a community event because people can decide what level of participation they want to have.
That sounds great. That sounds awesome. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being on the program. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate the opportunity.
All right. And thanks for watching, everybody. Want to remind you to save the dates. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd weekends of December, we are having the Made in Utah Festival, brought to you by Utah Stories and The Gateway. It's going to be an amazing, awesome shopping experience. It's not just like you go there and you buy stuff. It's a full-on experience where you get to sample the best craft breweries that have basically changed up their formulas since this 5.0 law took effect. We'll have distilleries where we have mixologists at bars making amazing cocktails, and then you get to enjoy having a drink while you shop and you listen to local bands on stages. We're having 3 rooms, 3 big former sections of the Gateway filled up with 60 local vendors, and all of the wares they're selling are amazing. We've carefully curated all of the very best of local Utah to be there. So be sure to come out to our Made in Utah Festival and spend some time there, and your purchase of a drink will support our local journalism here. It's our big fundraiser, actually. So by buying a cocktail, buying a craft beer, you are supporting local journalism and supporting excellent guests like Joe being on our program. And so with that, thank you again for watching. Our production assistant is Tyler Bond, and production support is also provided by Connie Lewis. Until next time, bye-bye. The Utah Story Show is brought to you in part by Curry Pizza, who has been serving Indian food for over 10 years. They opened their first location in a small town called Bicknell in southern Utah. That's when they began serving some of the incredible pizzas such as chicken tiki masala pizza with all fresh spices and ingredients, old world fresh Italian sausage and spicy sausage, as well as mango korma pizza. Guy Fieri recently learned about Curry Pizza and featured them on his show, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Check out the episode, but more importantly, check out Curry Pizza. They are truly awesome. The Utah Story Show is also brought to you by Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef. Premium, all-natural grass-fed beef delivered fresh to your door, free anywhere in the state of Utah. Order yours today at paisleys.com. That's PAIZLEES.com. Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef, always the right choice. The Utah Story Show is also brought to you by Utah State, home of the Aggies. Living on campus means more sleep, more friends, and better grades. While others are driving or walking to campus, you're getting those precious extra minutes of sleep. Instead of going home to your mom or your cat, you're hanging out with roommates, neighbors, and friends. On-campus housing is a community of academic support, peers, mentors, friends, and constant activities. For a virtual tour, room details, theme options, and to apply, visit usu.edu/housing.